Hey guys, Steph Sanity. Thank you for joining me for another video. Today is going to be all about lettering, specifically with the Arteza Real brush pens. I'm going to be giving you an in-depth tutorial. These are my favorite brush pens. I keep my Arteza brush pens in this container that I had spray painted with gold glitter. I love it for storage. I also have my Crayola super tip markers in here and some Tombow dual brush pens, which are both very popular types of brush pens. I use multiple types, but my favorite is the Arteza ones, of course. And then stay tuned because I will be comparing them to all my other brush pens, maybe about 7 different types. It's going to be the theme of an upcoming video, and I'll have recommendations for every single person who tries brush lettering. I do have a backup pack, and I'll show you that so you know what the package will look like when you get them. You can see why I like to store mine the way that I do. The packaging they come in is just awful. It comes in thin plastic trays stacked on top of each other that will get on your nerves pretty much immediately. All the pens will be falling out and they're hard to snap back in and get out. It's just annoying. They're a little too long to store in pencil bags as well, so I'm thinking about making some carrying cases for them and adding them to my shop, so we'll see about that. But for now, I recommend taking these out and just putting them in pretty much anything else. I do have some other sets of art supplies from Arteza, and they come in tins that are so much better. I much prefer that packaging, and I don't know what they were thinking with the brush pens, especially because I feel like they're the most popular item Arteza has. Maybe that's just me. But the quality is good and they're affordable, so I don't mind. It's just something worth noting that I wanted to share with you guys so you're not disappointed once you actually get them. So this is my lettering journal. This is what I'll be working in today. This particular journal has grid style paper, which can be great for beginners because it's easiest to ensure that your letters are consistent in the size and space because you can just count the squares. But you can get any kind of paper that you want, but note that if you use watercolor paper, because you think watercolor pens and watercolor paper, the pens can skip a little bit from the texture. They won't flow quite as smoothly as you see in this video, but I do use watercolor paper all the time and it works just fine. It's not like felt tip pens like Tombow where you can damage the tips, which is one of the best features of these brush pens, and I'll get more into detail and show you more about that in a little bit. Alright, so as far as colors that we're going to use in this video, just throughout all of our lettering, I'm going to group them by color family so I can discuss some of the pros and cons without a difference in the color being a distraction. And they do have tons of vibrant colors to choose from. Maybe that's your taste. They definitely have some that will appeal to you, but we're going to keep it neutral for the most part today because I'm more of a neutral person and I think it'll be easier to pay attention to the points that I share. We're going to go with gray, greens, and some browns. Okay, so if you don't know, these pens are filled with water-based ink, and it works pretty much exactly like a paintbrush and watercolor paints, except there's no mess or cleanup, and it's pretty much an all-in-one tool. The flow of them is pretty much the same, and the tip is actually a brush tip with bristles. So that makes it very similar to a paintbrush and not like typical brush pens, which most of them have felt tips from my experience. But I'm going to refrain from comparing them to other brush pens in this video because I do have that upcoming video where I'll go very into detail about that. I just did want to say that that's one of the biggest differences, so you're going to have to use them different. But before we get started on this paper, let me just show you my first point on this notepad that I use for scrap paper. This is going to be one pro and one con. Let me just quickly uncap these so I can reach for them easily as I talk. So the first con is that there's a huge inconsistency in the tips and the thickness of them. If you see the one in the middle here, it comes to less of a sharp point, whereas this one in particular is very sharp and very thin all throughout. This one is kind of in the middle of those twos, in the middle of the extremes. It sounds very nitpicky to point that out, but it really does make a difference when you're doing your lettering, and if you aren't aware of it, then it might become very frustrating for you and give you a bad impression. So I do want to warn you of that. You do have to kind of cater to the inconsistencies a little bit and get the hang of them and just know that they're there. It is worth it though, trust me, once you hear the pros. Just know that like this one on the end, for example, it's really hard to get detailed small lettering, very small letters with precise strokes. So you do have to be a little selective. You kind of want to cater to the differences in the tips and the details of these pens, and then you'll get the best results. Alright, let's get into some swatches. So you can see that's a nice wash of color, not completely opaque. It's the perfect amount for me personally. I'm going to add some more strokes around it so you can see you can intensify it and you can get rid of any of the harsh lines by blending. Back to the swatch for comparison purposes, we'll do a line with an average thickness and then a thinner line underneath. The thicker line is just more pressure that I'm using, and I'm using more of the brush on the paper, whereas for a thinner line, I'm just using the very, very tip of the bristles. So you're going to kind of automatically lean the pen a little bit to the side in order to get a thicker line, to use more of the brush, if that makes sense. And when you slant the brush, you use more of the brush, versus upright, you use less of the brush, and focus the pressure on the tip. Very light pressure for a thin line. You can see with either swatch that it's easy to maintain control of the pen. If you're having trouble with that, just keep practicing and you'll get a feel for it. If any of that was confusing to you at all, don't worry, we'll go over it again and I'll show you more about that later. But going into the next swatch with the next brush pen, we're going to do the same thing, and then as well the same with the last one, and you can see the differences and judge them for yourself. Okay, let me show you how I would do my normal writing, and I'll walk you through it and I'll slow it down, and I'll also show you from another angle here in a second. But I will get into mistakes that you may be making right after this. So if you try to follow along with me and create the same lettering the same way and you run into some issues, don't worry, stay tuned, because at the end I will give you some tips for problems you may be running into. But I just want to show you different angles so you can see the amount of pressure that I'm applying and also the speed that I'm going. This one's a little bit slowed down, but the first clip was real time, and I'm just taking my time, making sure that the pressure and the angles are the way that I want them, if that makes sense. You end up getting a feel for it the more that you do it. I'm switching off to another brush pen, the lighter gray, for this second word, and because it's a little bit more difficult to control, I'm not doing cursive for this word, and I want the letters to be a little bit chunkier and taller, so I'm just kind of navigating the pen differently. If you follow along, you should be able to do the same thing in your own style of writing, and then always go back and just touch things up, because it's very rare that I get it perfect the first time. You could even write in your normal style handwriting and then just go back and thicken the downstrokes to get the brush letter effect. Just make it fun and creative. That's one of the things I really like about these brush pens. Not that they're imperfect, but just that you can tell that it was done with style and creativity. If you can write in cursive, there's no way that you can't replicate exactly what I'm doing. It just may be in your own handwriting and style, which you can develop and get better with practice. So if that's what you don't like about your brush lettering, don't worry. Just make it your own and own it. And you can also add some stylistic effects that are super easy. Anybody can do them, just to take it to the next level to make it look even better, and I'm sure you'll be happier with the result. So you can see in detail how I'm touching everything up and thickening the lines, just really carefully using short strokes. You can do the same thing, and I'm also being careful not to add too much color to those areas to make it too obvious that I touched it up. But I think the overall look of that is really nice. You get that depth and dimension, and it also is a little more interesting to look at than if you were to just use a single color felt tip sort of pen. So this angle is in real time, and I wanted to zoom it out a little bit so you can still see what I'm doing, but you can also take note of the paper. It helps you to see the amount of pressure that I'm applying, how the paper kind of dips in when I do my downstrokes, because I am applying more pressure. And then you can see my wrist, how that's really not moving too much throughout this. I know a lot of people say that when they do brush lettering, it's all on the wrist, but I'm not moving that too much. So I just wanted to show you guys from that angle so you get a better idea. So when you try to replicate this, then you'll kind of see it from the same view that you'd be looking at. Okay, now for some of the accents or stylistic effects that I often talk about. I'm just taking a darker pen and going over the middle part of the letters of future here, and you can see they blend together pretty nicely and it adds a nice effect. Could also go in with a brush and water and blend it in a little bit more, but I like the way that looks. And then I'm just adding some strokes to make another accent with a lighter pen, and then doing the same thing with a darker pen over the word bright, just darkening the bottoms of the letters, just to show you that you can do some different things. The options are limitless with the creativity parts. I also don't have a problem with these pens bleeding through. They do bleed a little bit through the back of the page, but I often don't use those anyway. But you can see that the page behind it is completely clean. Alright, now for some more effects. We're going to add some shadows and highlights, and here's the supplies that I use. Everything will be linked down below, but this is my Faber-Castell Artist Pip Pen in extra small, and then a white Jelly Roll pen. This one works really well with the Arteza brush pens. The textures work together very seamlessly, and it's not overly obvious, but it does give a nice pop of color. So I'm just adding the highlights and shadows in with these letters. It's pretty self-explanatory. You can see what I'm doing. I'm going through the first clip a little bit faster because my hand's covering covering up most of that. The next one I'm keeping real time because you can see a little bit more of what I'm doing. Okay, and with the shadows as well, you can't see everything I'm doing just because my hand's blocking it. Since it is a regular pen, I kind of have to hold the pen upright and it gets in the view of the camera. But I still want to show you this part because I wanted to show you how you can take the lettering from just being pretty good to like really good with just those little effects. And those are things that you could also apply to your own lettering. Okay, so one of the main tips that I have that I still use to this day, it can help anybody who's struggling with brush lettering or getting used to new pens, and that is to map everything out with a pencil and eraser first, just so you can see the placement of your letters and make any corrections if you want to before you go in with something that's a little more permanent. I just do a rough guideline. I don't always follow it exactly, but it gives me an idea of the spacing and the style of the letters that I want to keep in the final product. I'm going to use the brush pens that I selected earlier in the brown tones to write out this next quote. And I'm just going to mix up the colors, add some different fonts and some effects like I did in the first quote. Once again, I'm keeping this part in real time so you can see the pace that I'm working at and how much time that I'm taking to do each letter and go back and fix each one. It is time consuming, but I think it's pretty relaxing, and that's the part I like about brush lettering. I'm just showing you here the angle that I'm holding the pen for this thinner lettering. I would say it's about a 45-degree angle. You don't want to slant it too much, and I'll show you what happens if you do that. You get this weird patchy kind of skipping with the pen, and it's hard to control your strokes to get up strokes thinner and your downstrokes a little bit thicker. There's not much variation here because it's just using too much of the pen and it's too saturated with the ink. And then I'm showing you the opposite extreme, where if you hold the pen like a normal pen too upright, you're just using the very tip and you're not getting that variation in the thickness of the lines either. And then I'm showing you if you put too much pressure directly on the tip, that you'll get this kind of fraying, and felt tip brush pens would be ruined at this point, and it's hard to come back from that. You probably would have ruined the pen, but luckily with these Arteza brush pens, you can kind of mold them back into their original shape and no damage done, but it's still not good technique. So you want to be really gentle with your pens no matter what brand that you're using, and your work will show that. And in order to find the balance, if you're struggling at all, I would just keep doing this motion or keep making ends, like cursive ends connected together. That will help you to get the balance right and to just have that nice flow of good solid downstrokes and upstrokes with a good amount of consistency. That is like the most helpful in my opinion. You can also do cursive O's. That's a good balance as well. A little more advanced than what I'm doing here, but both of them would work great as a practice. Okay, so the next word that I'm writing, same drill, exactly the same steps and techniques that I already described. This is going to be some larger lettering, and I am using cursive, which is typically what you see with brush lettering. I'm not following the outline exactly, but it is a nice guide, and then you'll notice that I get a little bit thicker as I go down the letters because I'm realizing that I have more space than I may have anticipated. I'm going as thick as I want the whole word to look here at the end, and I'm going back in and thickening everything else to match that G. Okay, so here's another really cool technique that you can add to your lettering, like a stylistic effect, and that's to kind of give your letters some movement, at least it looks like it, from just doing like the same shadow effect, but adding more lines to it. So you're pretty much doing 2 or 3 lines on the left side of the downstrokes that are thicker, if that makes sense, and then you're doing the top. So you can either do the left and the top to give a shadow, or you can do the bottom and the right to give a cool shadow too. Just pick one and stay consistent. So I'm doing that here, and it's a perfect way to hide any mistakes if you're not happy with the way it looks. If your letters are a little uneven, then this can help to even out the overall look of the word and to give it a different look when you're mixing it with other fonts. I really like this technique. If you saw my September bullet journal setup video, I did this for the title page and it sounded like a lot of you liked that. So I highly recommend trying out this technique for some of your lettering. It's one of those things where it's super easy to do it, but it makes your work look very advanced. And to change it up a little bit, the more techniques that you use, you don't want to overdo it, but it adds some more visual interest. So I'm just doing some lines at the bottom of the letters for the words big problems. And now looking at it, I think white would have been a lot cooler to do. So you could also do that as like a highlight effect. It is definitely harder to see on camera. It kind of blends in more on camera. I still think the white would have been a better choice for this. The next part I'm really excited to show you about because I think this is really beneficial to see. I'm taking all 6 of the green brush pens, all 6 colors, and I'm writing the same word in the same style with each of the pens so you can see the subtle differences between each of them, even though I'm writing the same way using the same techniques. So like I said, some of it is out of your control, but overall you still get the same look and you get each one being unique, which I honestly like. I like the imperfect look of it. I much prefer the subtle differences over it looking like it came off of a printer, but let me know what your guys' preference is, if you guys like that look as well or if it's just me. Okay, I'm going to write one more word using most of these green shades just to get a little bit more playful with the font and show you that you can really just play around with different styles. Keep playing around with new ones until you develop your signature one. That's what I did. There's a lot of fonts from the beginning that I started to replicate, I guess, from things that I've seen, especially on Instagram. And I played around with it and tweaked the letters until I found my personal favorite way of doing it, and now I feel like I kind of have a style to where if you see it then you recognize it as my own. So yeah, definitely recommend for you guys to do that as well. Replicate things that you've seen, replicate my style as you see it here, and then tweak it until you get your own signature style. But I'm just going to go in and shade and add some depth using the other tones of the green just to show you that these layer very nicely and you can just blend them out accordingly. And then I think that about covers it for my tips and examples and just the lettering that we're going to do today. And then we're going to move on to the mistakes that you may run into, that you may make when you go to try to do this for yourself. I'm giving an example of writing too thin, and to resolve this issue you do want to tilt the pen more, like I said earlier in the video. And then the next line we're going to write the opposite extreme, where we tilt the pen too much and we don't have any control over the downstrokes and the upstrokes and the ink flow, and this is definitely not what we want. So the third line is going to be a perfect balance in between the two extremes, and you want to aim for that, and hopefully you're able to recognize if you're doing one of the two. The next mistake deals with pressure, and I did mention this, but I want to show you the wrong ways to do it right here, clear, so you can follow along and kind of recognize if you're making these mistakes. The first one is not enough pressure. The second one is too much pressure. So you see it's similar to the first mistake, but if you really observe the differences, then you will notice them. The trick is to have a good balance of pressure where you're applying a lot of pressure on the downstrokes and then very little pressure for the upstrokes. If you do this slowly, it's easier to get the hang of. Okay, and one last thing, and I hope this is not getting redundant, but I just want to show you the perfect amount of pressure and the perfect slant to hold the pen, and also good timing, because timing is important for the flow of the ink as well, or the watercolor. So I just want to show you one last word. I'm just going to write the word good, because there is a lot of thick downstrokes and thin upstrokes that you would use for this. And then once that is done, I'm just writing timing for the last tip to keep in mind for when you're lettering. And that'll be it for this video and all my tips using the Arteza Real brush pens to create your perfect brush lettering. Alright guys, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Please give it a thumbs up if you liked this video and got something out of it. Comment below if you have any questions or if I left anything out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.